The first thing Roy Callan noticed about Outpost Drev 9 was that everything had a rank. The dragons were lined up by size. The officers stood in order of medals. Even the food in the mess hall was served in a specific sequence, highest rank first, always. The Drath Conclave did not believe in equality. They believed in hierarchy the way other species believed in gravity. It simply was. Roy had been stationed here for 6 weeks as Earth's liaison. He was not a soldier or a diplomat by training. He was a mechanic, a deep space salvage engineer who had been handed a title, a uniform, and a one-way transit pass because Earth needed a body in the room when the Conclave held its quarterly meeting. Any body would do. He had fixed engines for 15 years. He had patched hull breaches in the dark, rewired power cores with frozen fingers, kept dying ships alive long enough to limp home. He was good at his job, but nobody here cared about his job. They cared about what he represented, a species that had no dragons, no standing army, and no particular reason to be respected. The bond ceremony happened once a season. Every officer of sufficient rank received a dragon companion. The creatures were extraordinary living resonance engines, capable of flight, partially telepathic, and considered the highest symbol of status in the Conclave. The best dragons went to the highest officers. It had always been this way. Roy watched from the side of the hall as each creature was led out and matched to its officer. He was not expecting to be included. His rank did not qualify for it. He had not asked. Then Warden Drev, the senior officer who ran the outpost with the warmth of a closed airlock, raised one hand and called for quiet. "We have one more bond to perform," he said. The laughter started before the containment sled even reached the center of the hall. The creature on it was white, not the clean white of polished bone, but the dull, gray-edged white of something that had stopped being cared for a long time ago. She was large, larger than any dragon Roy had seen, but she was folded in on herself in a way that made her seem small. Her wings hung at her sides like torn curtains. One eye was clouded completely over. The other tracked the room with a slow, exhausted suspicion. The bioscanner display above the sled read the same thing it had apparently read for months: decommission pending. A field officer near Roy translated what the warden said for the record. The albino stonewing, designation SOVA, unfit for service, a gift for our human liaison. The laughter got louder. Roy did not laugh. He did not look angry either. He stood very still for a moment, the way he stood when he was looking at a broken piece of machinery and deciding where to start. Then he walked across the hall toward the sled. The crowd quieted slightly, not out of respect, but out of curiosity. The creature on the sled turned her functioning eye toward him as he approached, her lip pulled back, showing teeth that were still sharp even if everything else had failed her. Roy stopped 2 meters away. He crouched down, got himself to her eye level. He looked at her, not at the ruined wings, not at the scanner readout, not at the clouded eye. He looked at the one good eye that was watching him back. He said 2 words, quietly, not performing them for the room. "I see you." Sova's lip stayed pulled back. Her eye did not leave his face. Then she lunged and snapped. Her teeth closed on empty air. Roy had not flinched back. He had simply tilted his chin aside, barely enough, the way someone moves when a door swings closer than expected. He stayed crouched. He did not retreat. The hall was very quiet now. Roy stayed in that position for another 30 seconds. Then he stood up slowly, turned to the nearest Drath logistics officer, and asked for Sova's full medical file. The officer stared at him. "Her records," Roy said. "Biological assessments, resonance spine diagnostics, wing membrane reports, everything you have." The officer looked at Warden Drev. Drev looked at Roy with the expression of someone watching a game they had already won take an unexpected move. Then he smiled and granted it with a small wave of his hand. Another joke. It was all still a joke to him. Field Officer Nura stood near the back of the hall. She had laughed with the others at first. She stopped when Roy walked toward the sled. She was still watching him now, her expression difficult to read, as he was handed a data tablet with Sova's file loaded onto it. Roy did not look at the hall. He did not look at Drev. He looked at the tablet and then back at Sova, and then he sat down on the floor of the ceremony hall in front of everyone and began to read. Sova watched him from the sled, her lips slowly lowered. Her breathing was shallow and clearly painful, but she did not look away from the human sitting cross-legged on the floor with her file in his hands. Nobody laughed this time. The lower bay smelled like wet stone and old blood. It was the least used section of the outpost, a wide, low-ceilinged storage area that had been converted into Sova's holding space sometime before Roy arrived. There was a drain in the center of the floor, a rusted water trough along one wall, and a single overhead light that flickered twice before deciding to stay on. The containment sled had been rolled in and left. Someone had thrown a bucket of feed pellets near the door. Half of them were still there, untouched. Roy came every day. He did not try to touch her the first week. He came in the morning, sat against the far wall with her file on his tablet, and read. When he had questions, he made notes. He was thorough and quiet. Sova watched him from across the bay, suspicious every single time, as if she expected the situation to change. It did not change, he just kept coming back. On the 8th day, Roy went looking for the outpost's medical officer. Bolg was a Gren, short, wide, with damp grey skin and the permanent expression of someone who had been working too long and sleeping too little. Roy found him in the medical bay, which also smelled like disinfectant and something Roy chose not to identify. He was reorganizing supply canisters when Roy knocked on the frame of the open door. "You are the human," Bolg said. "Roy, I have questions about the albino dragon." Bolg put down the canister slowly. "I was supposed to euthanize her," he said. 3 months ago, I filed an extension request, then another. The paperwork became complicated." Roy looked at him. "Why?" Bolg was quiet for a moment. "Because she had not died yet," he said, "and I did not want to be the one to decide that she should." Roy sat down in a chair that Bolg had not offered and opened his tablet. The conversations that followed were long. Bolg knew the biology the way Roy knew his engines from years of frustrated intimacy. He explained the resonance spine, a structure of layered crystal grown inside the dragon's dorsal column, tuned over a lifetime to a precise harmonic frequency. The spine did not generate lift directly. It generated a frequency. The frequency interacted with the dragon's wing membrane to produce a field, invisible, physical, absolutely necessary for flight. Without it, the wings were just weight. Sova's resonance spine had 3 fracture points. The crystal had not shattered, it had cracked along its natural growth lines, the way old glass cracks along a seam. The frequency it produced was degraded, inconsistent, painful. "Can it be repaired?" Roy asked. "Biological crystal does not regenerate." The Conclave's assessment. "I am not asking about the Conclave's assessment. I am asking if it can be repaired." Bolg sat back and looked at him. "Not by any method currently in the Conclave's medical records." Roy nodded slowly. He looked at his notes. He did not speak for almost a full minute. "The fractures are not blocking the frequency entirely," he said finally. "The readings show degraded output, not zero output, so the spine is still working. It is just working badly." "Correct, but badly is not enough to." "What if you did not fix the spine?" Roy said. "What if you supported the frequency externally, amplified what is already there?" Bolg stared at him. Roy turned his tablet around and showed Bolg a rough schematic he had been drawing since the 3rd day in the lower bay. On salvage ships, the harmonic stabilizer can fail partially. A cracked oscillator does not always get replaced. Sometimes you build an external support frame and run a secondary frequency pulse alongside it. The 2 signals align, the primary gets boosted, and the system holds. "A dragon is not a ship." "No, but the physics of frequency and vibration are the same everywhere." Roy tapped the schematic. "I need to know the exact fracture frequencies Sova's spine is producing. Every degraded tone. I need to build a support signal that matches them." Bolg was quiet for a long time. "You actually think this could work?" he said. I think it is worth finding out, Roy said. She is going to be euthanized anyway if we do nothing, so the cost of trying is very low. Bolg looked at the schematic on the tablet for a long moment. It was rough. It was not a medical drawing or a conclave engineering design. It looked like something a person had drawn while sitting on the floor in a storage bay. But the logic of it was clean, and Bolg had spent enough years with biology to see that the logic was not wrong. He pulled out his own scanner and said, I have detailed resonance readings from last month's assessment. They were for the euthanasia file. Now they are for something else, Roy said. Bolg pulled up the data and turned the screen toward Roy. Roy submitted his materials request the next morning. Harmonic mesh, bonding resin, microfilament wire, a portable resonance emitter. The logistics officer denied it immediately. Warden Drev reversed the denial within the hour and approved everything. He was still playing the game, still sure the punchline was coming. In the lower bay, Sova had moved from the far wall to the center of the room overnight. She was still wary. She was still watching the door, but she was 3 meters closer to where Roy usually sat. Roy noticed. He did not comment on it. He started building. Bolg said that Velshara dragons had partial language comprehension after long exposure to speech. Not full understanding, more like pattern recognition. They learned which sounds meant danger, which meant food, which meant pain was coming. An old dragon like Sova, who had lived among the conclave for what the bioscans estimated was close to a century, would have absorbed a great deal. So Roy talked while he worked. He built the harness at a workbench he set up in the corner of the bay. He explained each piece out loud as he assembled it, not performing, not trying to be understood completely, just filling the space with his voice and letting her grow used to the sound of it. He told her what the harmonic mesh was made of. He explained how the resonance emitter worked. He described what he was trying to do in plain, unhurried words. Sova sat 10 meters away and listened. She did not relax, but she listened. 2 weeks passed. The harness was a strange-looking thing. It was not elegant. It was a framework of lightweight salvage-grade alloy shaped to cradle the upper dorsal column without putting pressure on the fractured sections of the spine. The resonance emitter was embedded into the frame, a small unit designed for ship stabilizer systems, modified to produce a lower, slower pulse. Thin mesh panels extended from the frame's sides to clip along the base of the wing joints. It was functional. It was not beautiful. Roy held it up one morning and said, "This is it. I think it will help. I could be wrong, but I want to try." Sova's eye tracked the object in his hands. He walked toward her slowly. She let him get to 7 meters, then 5, then 4, and the lip came up, the teeth showed, and the low sound she made was not quite a growl and not quite anything else. Roy stopped. He sat down on the floor with the harness across his knees. He waited. Sova did not lunge. She held the warning for a long moment and then let it go slowly, the sound fading. Her eye stayed on him. Roy waited another 10 minutes. Then he stood up and walked to within 2 meters and crouched down again. He held the harness out, not pushing it toward her, just showing it, letting her see it, smell it. She sniffed in his direction, one long, slow inhale. Then she struck, faster than something in that much pain should have been able to move. Her head came forward and her teeth closed on his forearm. Not a full bite, she had not committed to it, but it was enough. Roy hissed through his teeth. He did not pull away. He went very still. Sova held him for 3 seconds, released. Roy sat back and looked at his arm. The sleeve was torn. There was blood. He pressed his hand over it, applied pressure, and stayed exactly where he was. He did not leave. 40 minutes passed. Roy sat on the floor of the bay and kept pressure on his arm and did not speak and did not leave. The overhead light flickered once. Somewhere in the outpost, distant machinery hummed. Sova made a sound. It was low and rough, and Roy did not know what it meant. Then she took 3 steps toward him. Her movement was uneven. Her left side carried most of her weight because the wing on the right dragged slightly, but she crossed the distance and stopped directly in front of him. She lowered her head, sniffed the wound on his arm. Roy did not move. She pulled back, looked at him. Then she turned and walked back to the center of the bay and lay down, facing away. Roy let out a slow breath. The next day, Bolg cleaned and sealed the bite. He said it was not deep. Roy said he knew. Bolg said he should have pulled back. Roy said if he had pulled back, she would have learned that aggression created distance and they would have to start over. Bolg looked at him for a long moment and did not argue. The second attempt happened 3 days later. Roy came in, set the harness down, and sat with it for a while. Then he stood up and walked to Sova and held the harness near her back. She turned her head. She did not strike. Roy fitted the frame along her dorsal column carefully, checking the pressure points Bolg had marked, keeping away from the fracture sites. The clips for the wing joints were last. He engaged them slowly, talking the whole time in a low, even voice. Then he reached for the emitter switch. He paused. "This might feel strange," he said. "I am going to turn it on low." He activated it. Sova went rigid. Every muscle along her back locked at once, and Roy's hand hovered near the switch, ready to kill it. Then something changed. It was subtle, the way tension leaves a cable when you release the right amount of pressure. Her back muscles did not relax completely, but they shifted. Bolg's scanner, which he was holding from across the bay, showed a number Roy had been waiting for. Sova's pain signature dropped by 26%. She made a sound again, the same rough, low sound as before. But this time Roy recognized it for what it was, not aggression, not a warning. It was the sound of something that had been hurting for a very long time, suddenly hurting a little less. Roy kept his hand near the switch and did not move and did not speak and let her have the moment. The outpost had a rhythm to it. Morning shift, midday shift, night cycle, maintenance runs, meal rotations, formation checks. The Drath Conclave ran their installation the same way every day because predictability was order, and order was survival in deep space. Roy became part of that rhythm. He went to the lower bay every morning. He left every evening. In between, things changed, slowly, measurably, undeniably. Sova started eating. It did not happen all at once. The first week after the harness fitting, she ate half of what Bolg left for her. The second week, she ate all of it. By the third week, she was pouring the empty trough at the door before Roy had even arrived, which Bolg described clinically in his notes as markedly increased appetite and described to Roy in person as "she is annoyed that you are late." The pain numbers kept dropping. Roy adjusted the emitter's pulse frequency in small increments every few days, dialing it closer to the exact degraded tones the broken spine was producing, tightening the harmonic match. Each adjustment required Bolg scanner readings, an hour of math, and another hour of careful tuning. It was dull, repetitive, precise work. Roy did not find it dull. He found it the same way he had always found this kind of work interesting. The wings were next. The membrane tiers were old and calcified at the edges. They would not heal. Roy had never expected them to. What he needed was to stop them from getting worse and to restore enough aerodynamic surface to make flight mechanically possible. He spent 5 days reading everything Bolg had on Velshara wing anatomy and 3 more days testing different mesh composites on scrap material before he was satisfied. He applied the structural mesh in sections, working outward from Sova's body. He used a flexible adhesive compound designed for ship hull patching, breathable, heat-tolerant, capable of moving with the membrane without cracking. The mesh was thin enough to see through. It covered the worst of the tiers and bridged the gaps between intact sections. The work required Sova to hold her wings extended for long periods. She did it. That was the part Roy did not write in his technical notes. Because he did not know how to note it without it sounding like something else. She held still. She extended the wing when he approached it. She adjusted the angle when he pressed gently at the leading edge. She was cooperating in a way that went beyond tolerance. She understood what he was trying to do, and she was helping. Bolg watched this from the corner of the bay one afternoon and said nothing for a long time. "She is intelligent," Roy said. "All Velshara are," Bolg replied. "We simply stopped asking this one to demonstrate it." Roy did not respond to that. He kept working on the wing. Walking practice started in the 4th week, short distances inside the bay at first, just getting Sova moving under her own weight without pain driving her into stillness. Her gait was uneven. The right side, where the wing dragged, pulled her slightly off course. Roy walked beside her every time, matching her pace, redirecting her with a light touch at the shoulder when she drifted. She stopped drifting by the end of the 1st week of walking practice. The outpost had noticed. Roy did not announce anything. He filed no reports and made no statements, but the lower bay had a wide door that was usually left open for ventilation, and people walked past it. Technicians on maintenance runs, junior officers taking shortcuts through the lower corridor. A few people stopped. Not for long. They did not want to be seen stopping. Nura started appearing more frequently. She came with clipboards and data pads, finding administrative reasons to be in the lower corridor. She asked Roy questions carefully worded as official inquiries. How was the resource usage? Was he within his allocated materials budget? Did he require additional lighting for the bay? Roy answered everything without making her feel observed. One evening she came without a clipboard and stood at the bay door and watched Sova walk a full circuit of the bay without limping. She watched Roy walk beside her, one hand free, the other in his jacket pocket. She watched Sova angle her head toward Roy when they turned at the far wall, and watched Roy tilt his head back in response, like it was a conversation. Nura asked, "Why did you not give up on her?" Roy thought about it. She had not given up, he said. Staying angry takes energy. She spent energy every day being angry at this place. That meant she still had energy to spend. He glanced over. Things that want to die go quiet first. Nura looked at Sova. Sova looked back at Nura with her one good eye, measuring her, and apparently decided she was acceptable. Roy submitted the bay access request 2 days later. Interior flight test, atmospheric simulation bay. He filed it under mobility exercise, bonded creature. 4 words that made it sound like a walk around the block. Bolg read the request and said Roy was either very confident or completely reckless. Roy said he was neither. He said Sova was ready. He had watched her. She extended her wings fully every morning on her own now. The mesh held. The harness pulse was tuned as closely as he could get it without better equipment. The numbers said she was ready. The numbers say it is possible, Bolg said. That is not the same as ready. It never is, Roy said. You filed the test anyway. The atmospheric simulation bay had not been used in 7 months. It was the largest enclosed space in the outpost, 400 meters of vertical clearance, a pressure-regulated environment originally built to acclimatize incoming colonists to the variable atmospheres of frontier worlds. It had not been decommissioned. It had simply been forgotten, the way large things sometimes are when smaller concerns fill up every day. Roy requested it for 1 hour. He did not post a notice. He did not send invitations. He filed a standard access form, routed it through Nura's office for clearance. She approved it the same afternoon, and Roy noticed she did not ask him to notify anyone, and he set the time for mid-shift, when the outpost was fully awake and the corridors were busy. Word did not need help to travel. By the time Roy led Sova through the simulation bay's main entrance, there were people lining the walls. He did not count them. He recognized Bolg near the equipment bay on the left. He recognized Nura near the entrance behind him. He recognized Warden Drev standing in the upper observation alcove with his arms folded, expression neutral, which meant he was working very hard to appear uninterested. Roy did not look at any of them for long. He looked at Sova. She had walked in with him without hesitation. That was the first thing. The simulation bay was loud with ambient systems and the shuffling of unexpected spectators and the deep hum of atmospheric regulators, and she had walked in anyway, her head level, her good eye moving over the space with something that looked, to Roy, very much like purpose. He unclipped her lead. He took 3 steps back and gave her room. The bay was very quiet. Sova stood in the open space at the center of the bay and did not move for almost a full minute. Her head came up slowly. She turned it to the left and then to the right, reading the air in the way stonewing dragons apparently did, tasting pressure, temperature, the invisible currents of a room with 400 meters above it. Then she spread her wings, both of them fully extended. Someone in the gathered crowd made a sound, not quite a word, not quite a gasp, just a sound, because the wingspan was extraordinary, even torn, even covered in dark mesh reinforcement, even asymmetrical and imperfect. The full reach of Sova's wings was something that filled the space differently. The white of her scales caught the overhead lights. The mesh lines ran across her wings like a road map of repairs made with care. She held the extension for 3 seconds. The harness pulsed, audible now, a low resonance that Roy felt more in his chest than heard with his ears. Then she ran. Her legs drove against the floor in long, uneven strides. 10 meters, 15. The wing beats began, not smooth, not powerful in the way a healthy dragon's would be, but working. The mesh held. The harness frequency rose. Roy stood perfectly still and watched the numbers on the handheld scanner Bolg had given him, and the numbers were doing exactly what he had calculated they would do. At 20 meters, she left the ground. 2 meters, 5. She was not climbing fast. She was not clean or graceful. She tilted slightly to the right on the first ascent and corrected, the way someone corrects a wobble on a bicycle automatically from something that was returning after a very long time away. 10 meters up, 20, 30. She leveled off at 60 meters and flew a slow, wide circle around the interior of the bay. Roy sat down on the floor. He did not plan to, his legs just put him there. Nobody spoke. 60-something people in the simulation bay, and the only sounds were the atmospheric systems, the resonance pulse of the harness, and the beat of Sova's wings turning in a long, white circle above them. Bolg watched his scanner, the pain signature he had been monitoring for nearly a year, the number that had never gone below 40%, no matter what they did, until Roy arrived, was reading at 11. He stared at it. He recalibrated the scanner. It still said 11. Nura had not moved from her position near the entrance. She became aware that she was holding her breath only when she began to feel it. She let it out slowly, and the sound she made doing it was very small, but the technician standing next to her heard it and did not say anything. Warden Drev stood in the observation alcove and watched. His arms were still folded. He did not move for the entire duration of the flight. Sova descended after 4 minutes. She came down in the same area she had taken off from, the landing unsteady but controlled. She skidded 2 meters to the right and caught herself. Roy was already on his feet and moving toward her. She lowered her head to his shoulder and left it there. Roy stood with his hand on the side of her neck and did not say anything and did not perform anything and did not look at the crowd. After a while, people started to move. Some left quietly, some stayed and talked in low voices. Warden Drev left the observation alcove without speaking to anyone. Nura stayed. She walked across the bay floor to where Roy was still standing with his hand on Sova's neck. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, formally, that she would be filing an updated assessment report on the resource allocation and outcomes. Roy nodded. She started to leave, stopped. I did not know humans could do that, she said. Roy glanced over, fly. Stay, she said. She left before he could respond. The reassignment notice arrived 2 days after the flight test. Roy read it over his morning drink, a compressed grain coffee substitute that tasted like cardboard but was warm, and warmth was enough. The notice was formal and precise. It cited Roy's demonstrated technical contribution to Conclave colonial operations and authorized his transfer to a senior liaison post at a higher-grade installation. The new position came with elevated diplomatic standing, better resource access, and a private quarters allocation. The word apology did not appear anywhere in the document. Warden Drev was Conclave through and through, and the Conclave did not apologize. They simply adjusted. Roy set the notice aside and finished his drink. He spent the morning in the lower bay doing what he had done every morning for the past 2 months. Harness check, emitter calibration. He ran a full diagnostic on the wing mesh adhesion points. One section near the right leading edge had started to show slight loosening, and he reapplied the compound and pressed it flat and waited for it to set. Sova held the wing out without being asked, at an angle that made the repair easier. Roy worked, she waited. The bay was quiet and ordinary in the way that things which were once extraordinary can become once they become routine. When he was done, Roy sat down against the wall and wrote his full technical report. He had been building it in pieces for weeks. Every measurement, every frequency reading, every calibration decision, every biological observation Bolg had contributed. He wrote it plainly, the way he wrote everything. Here is what was broken, here is what I tried, here is what worked, here is what did not. He filed it to the Conclave's open xenobiological archive. No restrictions, no credentials required to access it. Anyone in the Conclave colonial system with a data reader could pull it up. Bolg arrived at midday and found Roy cross-legged on the floor, which was where Roy usually was. He looked at the archive submission confirmation on Roy's tablet and made a sound. "You did not restrict access," Bolg said. "No. You could have negotiated that report, given it to Earth, held it for leverage. You would have had leverage." "I know," Roy said. Bolg stood there. He was the kind of person who believed in practical things, in dosages and survival rates and realistic outcomes. He had delayed a euthanasia order because he could not bring himself to follow it, and he had never told anyone that, and he was not sure how to deal with a person who reminded him of that quality in himself. "There are other animals like her," Bolg said. He said it like he had been preparing to say it for days, which he had. "I compiled a list, years ago, Conclave colonial units with bonded creatures or colony fauna that were assessed as non-viable and written off. 7 of them. I never told anyone because I did not know what to say." Roy looked up. "Can I see the list?" Bolg reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. Actual paper, Roy noted, not a data file, something Bolg had been carrying around. Roy unfolded it. 7 entries. Species names he did not recognize, location codes, date of non-viability assessment, brief medical notes in Bolg's handwriting. He read through it once. "We should go through these together," he said. Bolg sat down on the floor beside him. He had not planned to sit on the floor, but Roy was always on the floor, and standing over someone on the floor for a long conversation was awkward. A sound at the bay door. Nura stood at the entrance. She had a data pad. She always had a data pad, but she was not pretending to be there for administrative reasons this time. She looked at the 2 of them on the floor with Bolg's list between them, and she said, without preamble, that she had put in a transfer request. Roy waited. "To your new post," she said, "as liaison officer, there is a staffing gap that my qualifications cover." "There probably is," Roy said. She came in and sat down. Not on the floor, she pulled over a low equipment case and sat on that, which Roy thought was a reasonable compromise for someone who had been conclave formal her entire career. Sova, from across the bay, opened one eye, looked at Nura and closed it again. Accepted. They went through the list. Bolg explained each entry in plain terms. Roy asked questions. Nura, after the second entry, began asking questions too, careful at first, then less careful, the kind of questions that meant she was actually thinking and not managing. Near the end of the list, Roy said something that had been sitting in him since the flight test. He said that he did not think the thing they were doing was specifically human. He did not think it was about species. Nura looked at him. "What is it about then?" Roy looked at Sova, sleeping pale and large in the middle of the bay, the harness on her back, the mesh on her wings, her breathing slow and even. "It is about being told something cannot be fixed," he said, "and deciding that is someone else's conclusion, not yours." Nura was quiet for a while. Then she picked up the data pad she had brought in and pulled up a clean notes file. "Read me the first one again," she said. Bolg read it. Nura wrote it down. Roy looked at the entry and started thinking about the problem the way he always started thinking about a problem, from the part that was still working outward. Outside the bay, the outpost ran its rhythm. Shift change, meal rotation, formation check, everything moving the way it always moved, in its ordered and predictable lines. Inside the bay, 3 people sat on the floor, and a crate going through a list of broken things that the conclave had given up on. They were going to be there a while.